Good evening, everybody. Welcome to America TV. Hi, I'm Maya Trainer. I'm one of the guides here at America, and we welcome our audience joining us online. We truly hope that you are doing well and staying safe amidst this outbreak. Well, anyway, for those of you who are first-timers here, hi, welcome to America TV for the first time. America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center. Our mission is to provide a space for young generations of Indonesia to learn more about the United States. We have temporarily moved to a solely digital platform so you can enjoy our program from the comfort of your own home and help fund the curve of COVID-19. Don't forget to leave your questions in the comment box below, and our panelists will answer them later in the seminar. And for our friends here who are joining us through Zoom, there are a couple of features that you can use to actively participate in the seminar. You can use the raise hand section to ask your questions with your video on, or you can also use the chat box section whenever you wanted to say hi to the other participant and also the panelist as well. But please keep in mind to use these features wisely. Alright? Cool. Now, today we will be having the very first episode of Knowledge at America, titled Multiculturalism and Democracy. But as per usual, before we begin, we are going to have a social media quiz. You guys ready? Okay, here we go. The question is it true or false that the slogan of the Republic of Indonesia, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, has the same philosophy as the United States of America slogan, A Pluribus Unum? I will repeat the question one more time. Listen carefully. Is it true or false that the slogan of the Republic of Indonesia, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, has the same philosophy as the United States of America slogan, A Pluribus Unum? You can participate this quiz through our social media comment section, and stay tuned till the end of this program to find out if you get the answers right. Now, one more thing before we begin. Please don't hesitate to take a selfie, capture this moment, and share through your social media, and let everyone know that you are having a great time with America. And feel free to tag us on Instagram at ATAmerica. And without further ado, please welcome our first speaker for today, Bapak Muhammad Sigit Andi Rahman, Ph.D.
So thank you very much for the very nice welcome, Maya. And yeah, I would like also to welcome all of the participants, students, particularly my colleague and students from President University. So this is very important event and very relevant event, as President University is one of the campus in Indonesia that celebrate our multiculturalism in Indonesia. So I'll start my presentations by sharing my screen. Okay, so yeah, I hope everyone can see clearly. So yeah, my name is Sigit. So I'm teaching in President University. So I graduate from Oldham University, Norfolk, Virginia, and the picture is one of the activities that we did with among my Fulbright friends there, that we have celebrate Thanksgiving using our traditional outfit in one of the church together with the local Americans there. So this is very interesting issues, multiculturalism and democracy. Let me start with the very complex issue that we have in terms of discussing democracy. But in these presentations, I would like to address several things that we want to see how perspective of Indonesia and also Americans in terms of this diversity and how they handle their diverse populations, and whether this is actually relevant or good for democracy. And lastly, despite with all the bad thing happened recently, so I still want to kind of take up some lesson that I received from Americans. And I quote from one of the early scholars in democracy that study democracy in America, Alexis de Tocqueville, mentioned that culture and social practice provide the ultimate foundation of all political process. So in line with this statement, so I will share mostly in terms of my own experience interacting with Americans and how I understand how they manage the. Okay, excuse me. So a little bit echo. So hopefully I will not disturb your or set listening on this. Okay, and also in the same line. So as Alexis talked explaining about was it using his 7 months staying in America to understand the democracy in America. So I will mostly base on my what I read, what I see, what I experienced in America during the last 5 years. So let me start with a very basic thing that we can kind of see in terms of their similarities and differences. So both countries are multi-ethnic, multicultural populations, while I will say that Indonesia is more multi-ethnic. So we have 600 ethnic, 300 local spoken languages. But what I feel in US is more like a multinational because you can meet people from different part of the world. I can pray in the mosque side by side with people who has different colors, different accents, different appearance. And so it's more on the multinational things that I experience. So it's more complex on that. But and the next is also I found that as a Muslims that I feel very comfortable to express my religions, my belief that this is also there's some similarity in terms of how religions is very important in the Americans or Indonesian life. And although they have differences in terms of how they kind of institutionalized. Tom, the one that will speak after me, actually mentions that Indonesia is more like a religious state. We are not secular, but we are also not like Islamic or one religion's better than others. But we are religious on that. So state are supporting the religious community. We have Kementerian Agama and a lot of holidays. This is the important thing that we have a lot of holiday that to celebrate the diversity of the religions. While in the U.S. They call it political secularism, meaning that they, since from the beginning, they don't want to have one particular religions dominate the politics. However, Americans or the institutions, political institutions, there's no like enmity toward religions. They are very welcome, although they have very strict separations in terms of religions and politics. And lastly, in terms of the tolerance, so both I found that the both community are very welcome to new people, very friendly. Although probably in US they are friendly, but not in terms of like hospitality, meaning that you will not seeing you will meet the people in the US in the grocery. They welcome you, but they will not take you to their house or their home. But this is how Indonesia usually have in the village. So, but the issues in Indonesia is more like religious, political issues, while in US we have more multi dimensions, race, immigrations, and also in terms of sexual orientations. So there are different issues. As we talk about tolerance, so this is the thing that for what I understand, multiculturalism is not an issue in itself because this is a fact. But and also it is not problem toward democracy. But the thing is in between, the thing that determine whether this is beneficial or it's actually counterproductive for democracy is the exertion of tolerance. So I want to focus more on that. And with what I experienced, there's a kind of two different understanding of tolerance among both society. While in the U.S., they are celebrate more on the stressing on the individual liberty and egalitarianism, probably based on their history, their geography on that. While in Indonesia, this come from the term tenggang rasa, meaning feeling. So how you self-restrain. So in Indonesia, the notion of tolerance is not on the what you call it individual freedoms, but it's more on the benefit of the community or the communal. I think Tom will explain more detail on how historically we have these fine differences in our understanding on tolerance and also democracy. But when we talk about tolerance, particularly in terms of Indonesia, so what factors that influence in terms of the existence of tolerance or intolerance? I quoted from one of our beloved scholars, Saiful Mujani, that underlining them that three factors that very crucial in terms of building tolerance in Indonesia. Institutional engagements, meaning that if we have values, kind of Pancasila that being institutionalized, people are attached to that, so we will have more tolerance on that. Cultures, although we have similar religions, but certain culture or people have certain approach on tolerance or more tolerance than the others. And lastly, is a perception of socio-economic situations, security, condition, political stability actually really influence on how people will become more tolerant or intolerant. And from that reason, actually, so using that same line, or despite the what saw recently in US or even in the increasing intolerance, religious tolerance in Indonesia, I want to still want to take some of lessons learned that we, based on my own experience, that I see is beneficial for Indonesia. So first, I want to combine this red box on the right and also the justice pictures on the left. So meaning that although we Indonesia more emphasis on harmony, what's it kind of self-restraint. Sometimes we do with very excessive in the in term that we need to have more open in term of individual liberty. So let me give example that in US I can just sit together in a barbecue with someone who has very opposite understanding about religions, political values, even like maybe they believe in aliens or things, but we can sit together in the barbecue or become neighbor. One of the thing is because they have very clear rule of law, meaning that you are free to do things that you like as long as the law. So it, and also if I experience during even like during the Islamophobic rhetoric, I'm not really concerned because then if something happens, I know where to ask help. Our mosque during this time, difficult time, we work together with university. We work with law enforcement to ensure security, safety of the congregants in the mosque. And the blue, the yellow box this in the left, right, sorry. I want to underline it's kind of more my critics toward what I'm feeling here in Indonesia, assertive and some passive secularism. Uh, Notes in some that how state actually how they promote certain value to their citizens. So I don't say that Indonesian's government is very promoting secularism, but what we feel actually by promoting certain perceptions on what the way we believe or how should we dress, so how long your beard should so this kind of behavior lists that are being proposed and very narrow what you call it uh, approach in terms that what is the good citizen. So a lot of approach to confront in terms of religions and being Indonesians. So while what I see in US is promoting passive secularism, meaning that you have state is doesn't care or doesn't deal with what people believe or what they have in mind, as long as they commit on the certain principle, which is the constitutions. So they are U.S. citizens, they are Americans. So it's not Americans. It's not decided based on how you look, how you think or how you maybe behave or what kind of garments that you have. No, but they determine who is Americans based on the principles that they hold together. So, and I do think this is relevant with us as Indonesia. We have Pancasila, and we everyone's try to understand or to accept or to translate Pancasila based on their understanding, their religious belief, their culture. But we should have give a more open space for Indonesian people to accept the Pancasila in very broad manner. So it means that the state should not give very limited space that this is the correct interpretation of constitutions. And are American two constitutions obsessed? So this is one of headline in the Economist magazine. So I don't know the answer for that, but what I experience from Americans is they are very proud with their constitutions, and we as Indonesian, I think we should also very should proud with our UUD 1945, with our Pancasila, because this is serve as our common ground for our multicultural conditions and our democracy. And based on what we are experiencing nowadays with intolerance things, so what I experience is there's beside this, sorry, okay, the cultural strategies that we should have in terms that um, the key for the having tolerance, higher tolerance, I do think is more on the direct exposure or person-to-person interactions. So this is what we have in Norfolk, Virginia. So in campus, since the beginning, I was paired with one of American students. I learned about American culture. At the same time, they learn about Indonesians and Muslims. And also in the mosque, we have very cultural backgrounds. We try to conduct a lot of activities, mostly related to the food that become like intermediary for people to understand about their cultures, and also in the church. So every weeks, every Friday, there's a group of students working at the local church that hosting international students like dinner. We discuss a lot of things, and from this, actually, the cultural strategy actually will build up in terms of our understanding and our cultures. So sharing a recipe and people from here, actually, the understanding or the tolerance actually can be built. The last thing is also about voluntarism. Um, what I mean voluntarism is actually the essence of building tolerance is you are servicing others, actually have service to others actually is the key for for tolerance. So why I emphasize this kind of more practical approach, cultural approach, is what I understood from being Indonesians actually. So because we tend not to try to find out in terms why we have in terms of diversity, why we have multiculturalism, so and try to find a very like a strict agreement or what should we do, but we tend to more adapt. So we try to adapt. So we perceive diversity as some things that we need to accept, and we adapt to that. From that reason, actually, we Indonesia have the potential to respect different kind of understanding, belief, also political views. But as long as we have opportunity to interact, to experience differences at first hand, so that's why actually Indonesia, if we have opportunity to spend 1 year in other part of Indonesia, maybe a month in living in the people who has different religion with us, and but while at the same times we do charitable work, volunteerism for the people. This is actually the key for having tolerance among the society, among the groups, and also at the end, actually, this will improve flourishing or the value of democracy. So I think for that's for now in terms of my own experience. Of course, 5 years is very long time to learn a lot of things, but at the same time, it's very short that many places, many people that I haven't met that I really want to meet. So thank you very much for the attentions, and I think I will give the floor and the mic to Tom that probably will have very a lot of experience and research about among Indonesians, and so we can understand more in terms of why we have this kind of differences in terms of understanding tolerance or what kind of democracy that we want to build, and from that we can learn each other from Indonesians and also from Americans. Thank you again. Thank you for at America, and Tom, time is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to pull up my own presentation, and we'll get right into this. Okay. All right. Can everybody see this? Good. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Tom Pepinsky, and I teach in the government department at Cornell University. And I'll be talking today about multiculturalism and democracy from both Indian and American perspectives. The first point I'd like to share with you all is the following. There are no homogeneous democracies anywhere in the world. What this means is that the problem of, or the question of how democracies manage diversity and difference, different ethnic groups, different religious groups, so on and so forth, this is always a problem. This is always something that has to be solved. And the experiences of America and Indonesia are useful because they offer two different models for managing multiculturalism and democracy. But every country has to find a way to solve these problems. So diversity by religion and by ethnicity is a feature of all settler colonies. So these are countries that were founded by European and other settlers, like the United States or Australia or Canada or South Africa. It is also true for any post-colonial plural society, societies that were formed out of an anti-colonial struggle, countries such as Indonesia, but also India, Kenya, Brazil, and many others. What I would also emphasize is that this is also a problem or a challenge that faces countries that we often don't think of as diverse countries. The democracies of old Europe, these are places like Germany, France, Italy, the UK. There was a time in which one could argue that these were homogenous societies that had a single national ethnic group or a single national identity. But it is no longer the case. These are countries that have regional differences which are important. Think of the UK, England versus Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Or Germany, you can think of Bavaria versus the former East versus the parts of Denmark. And these are also countries that have large numbers of immigrants. Many of these immigrants are third or even fourth generation. And so even countries that maybe at one time had the view of being monoethnic societies or single nation societies, this is no longer the case. It's even true in countries that are held up as examples of the last remaining monoethnic democracies. Here I'm thinking of the cases of Japan and South Korea. Even though most citizens, nearly every citizen of Japan is Japanese, it is not true that only Japanese people live in Japan. And the same is true of South Korea. there are large numbers of workers from overseas who have settled in these countries. And the question of what rights, what status do they have, is also a question that these societies must confront. And it's interesting to think of the challenges and the experiences of Japan recently, because Japan has, in the past 5 years, made great strides to recognize the large numbers of migrants who live there and attempted to find ways to model their own experiences. So the point is, homogeneous democracies don't exist. This means that the question of how to manage diversity matters everywhere in any democracy. And the strategies for doing this are many. There is an inherent tension in democracy between freedom of belief, freedom of conscience, so my individual ability to have my own thoughts, my own beliefs that I hold privately, and other values that democracies hold dear as well, such as the value of dignity, participation, and membership. So even though I may have my own individual values, these may come into conflict with somebody else's dignity. So if I hold intolerant views about somebody else, how do we reconcile the fact that I'm holding my own values, but these values come in conflict with the dignity or the honor or the self-worth of somebody else? This is commonly understood when we think about democracy and difference and diversity, with the following example: must I support the rights of intolerant people? How do I, as an American or as an Indonesian, support the right of somebody who holds views that I find intolerant? And how we resolve this tension tells us a little bit about the ways that different countries have imagined and understood the challenges of multi-ethnic democracy. As you saw in the social media quiz at the beginning of today's presentation, both Indonesia and the United States share something particularly interesting, which is an ideology or a slogan. This isn't an ideology, or it's an idea. It's like a slogan or a belief that is held, which is that diversity, however conceived, is a source of strength rather than a challenge. So in the United States, we have the Latin word e pluribus unum, which means out of many one. And in Indonesian, we have the Sanskrit phrase Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which means roughly the same thing: out of many one, unity in diversity. Both of these are views that are designed to oppose the idea that diversity is a problem or differences are a problem. And in the United States context, the historical origin of this was not different religions or different ethnic groups, but rather it was different states, different parts of the country, which were each independent units under the British colonial regime that came together to create one large state that was going to become the United States. That's where the name United States comes from. So the idea is, out of many, we become one. In the Indonesian context, it's not the same history. It doesn't start from diversity of provinces, but rather it comes out of diversity of peoples. And again, the idea is that the diversity of the Indonesian people is not a problem. It's not a challenge. It's actually the natural state. And I am always reminded of the Sumpah Pemuda, of the independence struggle. Satu Nusa, Satu Bangsa, Satu Bahasa. One archipelago, one nation, one language. The idea that while plainly Indonesians recognize their diverse ethnic and religious heritage, what unites them is their Indonesianness. When I say I give you these histories because it's also important to remember that these ideas are political statements. They are arguments. They are designed to unite people. They're designed to convince people of their unity. And I think that they're effective that way. But they are attempts to remedy what is seen as potentially a problem by recasting that problem or that challenge as an inherent strength. Now, when we think about unity and diversity, it is helpful sometimes to be a little bit more precise about what we mean exactly by diversity. And here I want to show two different models of what a diverse society may look like. So on the left, we have a pie chart where all the pie slices are the same size. So here's an example in which every group in this society, each pie slice represents a group. And each group, there's 10 of them, each has their own color. In the equally diverse case on the left, every group is the same size. In this circumstance, the fact that every group is the same size means that there's no problem of protecting Group A in particular from Group H, or Group C from Group B, because there's no single group that is the dominant or the largest of them, and there's no general sense that there is a particular group which is disadvantaged relative to the others. They're all equally diverse in this sense. This is an example which is roughly similar to the case of the Netherlands, in which you have no majority. You had, until fairly recently, 3 roughly equal groups. I'm sorry, 4 roughly equal groups: Protestant, Catholic, Evangelical Protestant, and Socialist. So these 4 groups were roughly the same size. No one is larger than the other. And that was managed in a particular way that we can talk about. But the United States and Indonesia do not face this particular structure of ethnic and religious diversity. We are societies, both the United States and Indonesia, that are diverse and unequal. And that's the model that you see on the right. Group A is just numerically much larger than any of the other groups. And so you could, if all of groups B through J were to unite with one another, they would still together be smaller than Group A. In this circumstance, you have the question of how does one recognize and protect the rights of small groups when democracy itself would empower the majority to take positions that would be democratically supported by a majority of the population, and yet may infringe upon the rights of the minorities. So in this case, on the right, diverse and unequal, we have the challenge of how do you manage, what are the tools that a democracy can use to manage this diversity in the context of great imbalance across ethnic groups, religious groups. And so let's think about concrete questions in these two societies so that we're all clear what we're talking about. I'm an American, despite the fact that I wear my batik for presentations in Indonesia. And the United States is a country which is officially has no religion. It officially has no main ethnic group or national group. However, in point of fact, the United States is mostly Christian. Most Americans, if they express any religion at all, are Christian. Most Americans are also white, like me. Now, these numbers are greater than 50%. So they look like the diverse but unequal graph that I showed you in the last set of slides. But despite the fact that America is mostly Christian and mostly white, there are large Jewish, Muslim, atheist, and other religious minorities in the United States. And despite the fact that the United States is mostly white, there are large Black, Asian, Hispanic, and other racial minorities. And when I think about the history of American politics, a lot of American politics is about trying to figure out how to manage this diversity. We know why America is diverse the way that it is, because it's because of the history of slavery, because of the history of immigration, and we know that America's religious heritage was founded through what I consider quite noble principles of religious liberty, but it took a while to get there. It was not immediately implemented. And a lot of, as I say, the history from 1700s until today in the United States is trying to figure this out. And I'll share with you how that's been solved in a little bit. Now, Indonesia is a very different situation. I don't have to explain Indonesian to you because you are Indonesian, but let's remember, Indonesia is a mostly Muslim country. 87, 88% of Indonesians are Muslims. But there are large Christian, Catholic, Hindu, and other religious minorities in Indonesia as well. And these are large, even though these are small as percentage numbers, we're talking about tens of millions of people. So Indonesia is inherently religiously diverse. It has always been so. Indonesia's ethnic and sort of or racial structure is a little bit different than the United States. Javanese are the largest ethnic group in Indonesia, but they are not the majority. They are the plurality. About 40% of the population of Indonesia is ethnic Javanese. The next largest ethnic group is Sundanese, followed by many others as well. So it's not quite the same as the United States, in which the numerical majority of Americans are white. It is not true that the numerical majority of Indonesians are Javanese. But Javanese they stand apart as by far the largest of Indonesia's ethnic groups. And in different ways, the history of Indonesia has been the history of Indonesian democracy, has been the history of developing institutions, laws, and structures that recognize and support this form of diversity. So, what's the difference between Indonesia and the United States? Well, I think that, as I've said, both the United States and Indonesia have had to find ways to manage ethnic difference and ethnic diversity, and religious difference and religious diversity. They've had to find ways to combine democratic government with recognition of rights and recognition of status for different groups. And the idea for how to think about the different strategies followed by the United States and Indonesia, I am borrowing from Jeremy Menchik, who is a political scientist who also studies Indonesia, who works at Boston University. And he wrote a very good book. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to find it, called Islam and Democracy in Indonesia, Tolerance Without Liberty. And what he argues in this book is that you can distinguish the American approach, which is broadly liberal, from the Indonesian approach, which is broadly communalist, by thinking about what does the legal system presume is the core thing that has to be protected. In the American approach, it is the individual. So rights and recognition fall to the individual rather than to the community. Whereas under the Indonesian approach, Jeremy Menchik argues, rights and recognition in the first instance fall to the group rather than to the individual. And let's talk about what this means by first talking about the American model and then contrasting that with the Indonesian model, because I think spelling out some of these concrete differences will prove helpful in illuminating. So I am an American. Under the American model, where rights are for religious and identity purposes are vested in the individual, there is simply no law or regulation that is able to monitor religious beliefs or ethnic practices. It's not, so Sigit gave his examples of living in America and his experiences as a Muslim, and they made me very happy because it's the story of an individual free to pursue his religious faith in whatever way that he found appropriate with whoever he wanted to practice his religion with. But it's more than that. It's not just that he's free to do so. It's that there's nobody to ask. There's nowhere to look. There's no government body that's vested with the ability to make any decision whatsoever about religious practice or religious faith. Now, of course, there are, laws about if you want to build a church, you have to get a permit for the building, right? Or if you wish to, if a Buddhist community wishes to have a ceremony that draws 5,000 people, you have to make sure that the traffic is handled properly. And so it's not that there's that people are totally free to do whatever they want, but all of it is about regulation in terms of compliance with the secular civil law that governs the United States. And so if you want to have 5,000 people come for a Chinese New Year celebration, you just have to make sure that the traffic is in order and that there's enough parking, right? There's no one to ask about a permit for the religious aspects of this celebration. The religion is immaterial. In the American model, there is just no way to tell somebody that they are practicing their religion improperly. There is no way to tell somebody under American law that their beliefs are weird or inappropriate or crazy or dangerous. Likewise, and so we've talked about religion because it's easiest to understand there, but I actually also think ethnicity is very interesting in the American sense. I am a very common style of American in which I'm like, I don't really know my own ethnic identity properly. I'm America nasi campur, so I don't have a single ethnic identity. My last name is Jewish. I grew up going to English church. My children one has an Arabic name, one has a Hebrew name. My wife does not know where her grandparents were born, just probably in Europe somewhere. Americans, it is totally normal to not be able to even say what one's ethnic identity is. I know that I'm white, but that's about it. And there's actually no great way for American government to know what types of Americans there are. The tools that we have are the census, which gives us an opportunity to check a box that tells us what ethnic or religious group that we're supposed to be part of. But the census categories change every census dramatically. And so even knowing what the groups or ethnic or racial identities are is not a constant thing. So in the United States, we have no way of monitor or regulating what it means to be a mostly Scottish, partially Latvian, Episcopalian like I am. Or I can't do that correctly or incorrectly. There's nobody to tell me that I've done that right. And there is no national system that tells anybody how their religious or ethnic identity is designed to be practiced. So there's some real benefits to that because it really protects individual liberty, right? I can say I am whatever I want, and I can practice whatever faith that I want in whatever way that I want. And I can be inconsistent, and I can borrow, and I can change, and there's no way to know or to monitor that. The downside of this is that there is accordingly no mechanism that the United States government has to protect religious or ethnic identities that way. So in the event that somebody were to say that mostly Scottish, partially Latvian Episcopalians like you are stupid and shouldn't be in charge of the government anymore, there is no way in American law to protect that identity that I hold. That identity is my identity, but it is, I can practice it how I want, but I cannot, the law does not protect that identity as an identity. Now, one may not hurt me, one may not commit criminal acts against me, but there is no way to protect my honor as an Episcopalian. There is no way to protect my honor or my dignity as a mostly Scottish, partially Latvian person. There's no way to protect my children who are of mixed religious and ethnic heritage. There's just no way to do that. The American model puts all of the rights and the recognition on the individual, and in doing so, provides great freedom for individuals to practice and identify as they choose, which has the benefit of allowing there to be the wide variety of identities that we see in the United States. But these things cannot be protected as such. Let's contrast that to the Indonesian approach, which rests primarily on an approach that prioritizes group rights. So under Indonesia's, not under the constitution itself, although partially that, but more exactly under the implementing regulations and laws that have been written in accordance with the Indonesian constitution, laws and regulations outline the boundaries of permissible religious laws and belief. Now, this has been a touch point for Indonesian politics ever since the constitution was written. The crafting of the UUD 1945 was a process of trying to figure out what were the rights that were going to be held by various Indonesians. You all know of the so-called Jakarta Charter, which proposed that perhaps Sharia law would be made obligatory among Muslims. It was ultimately not implemented. But there is a wide range of government machinery and legal institutions that exist to determine the appropriate, proper, and legally permissible ways to go about organizing one's religion. The biggest difference between Indonesia, well, there's lots of difference between Indonesia and the United States, but there is no ministry of religion in the United States. And in Indonesia, there is a ministry of religion. And one thing that is interesting for me as an American is it is hard for me to even understand what would the ministry of religion do? What is its job? Because from my perspective as an American, I cannot imagine what a government would do in regulating religion or understanding how religion is supposed to be regulated. It is so foreign to me that I don't understand it. And yet, the Indonesian model does, it explicitly recognizes people's religious faith. It enumerates the possible religions that exist. Under the Jokowi administration, we've seen some interesting reforms to the boundaries of this, which I think are useful for us to think about later. But so the very idea starts with the recognition of the rights of the group. And so in the model that I gave you before, in which there is no way for the American government to protect the rights of all Episcopalians or all Christians, in the Indonesian model, there is, right? Because status and rights and recognition is given to the group in the first instance. And in this model, there is no mechanism, so the downside of this, there is no mechanism for protecting individual criticism, dissent, nonconformity, and so forth. So the Indonesian government has a constitutional and legal apparatus to regulate non-standard religious practices and non-standard religious beliefs. which again, to the American perspective, is entirely foreign. It seems strange. It's not good or bad. It's just very, very different from my approach. And the downside of this is that it is very hard to protect individual rights of criticism, dissent, and for an American, really important, nonconformity. So my own way of being an American does not conform to any standard that anybody has told me, and it never occurs to me to care. In the Indonesian approach, criticism, dissent, and nonconformity are much hard at the individual level, are much harder to protect, and this has implications for large groups of individuals who wish to dissent, who wish to criticize, or who wish to practice their religion in non-regulated, non-official ways. So this is a tension as well. This presents challenges, and here I will take an opportunity to speak directly about some of the challenges that I see in my country, and also, if I may, with your permission, to identify some challenges which I see in your country. I am an American, and I'm an American patriot, and I truly think that there is no other country where people of my heritage would have the opportunities that they have. So I'm a person who truly does believe in ideas upon which America was founded, even if they are imperfectly realized. But our system in the United States creates challenges. For example, what do we do in the United States if a president defends the actions of white racists, which is something that happened following the protests in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017? What do we do in the United States if a politician believes and spreads anti-Semitic conspiracies, which is something that is happening in the United States right now, in the Congress as well? We in the United States have a model of individual religious recognition and liberty, individual ethnic and racial identity that does not allow the government to tell us how to believe and how to practice. But here we see the downside. We see the problem of the government does not provide us tools to regulate these sorts of behaviors. The only way that we can do this is if a crime is committed, right? Until the crime is committed, we have no ability to regulate these things. And it makes me, the words, it's hard for me to think of the sort of level of anger and embarrassment that I feel when I hear these ideas in the United States, because they are contrary to the founding principles of our society, and they are being challenged right now. But the other principle of our society is individual rights and liberties really do matter. And so we do not throw people in jail or take them to court for being stupid anti-Semites, although sometimes I wish that we could. That's the challenge in the United States right now. In the Indonesian context, these sorts of problems are easy to regulate. If you found a politician who publicly, repeatedly incited ethnic violence or religious hatred, that person could be put in jail. That person could be tried, and that person has been tried. If you had a politician who said the things that American politicians said, you have in Indonesia the ability to invoke group-based rights to defend the dignity and the recognition of those who are being targeted. However, the downside in Indonesia is that it is hard to understand legitimate, what might be considered legitimate or fair or reasonable criticisms of religion. It is also difficult, and Indonesia has had 20 years of challenges in trying to figure this out, to deal with religious nonconformity. And these things are very hard to solve. I'm not going to tell you that I know the solution for it. But this is when values conflict, as I said, they will have to inevitably in any multicultural democracy, in any diverse democracy, we solve them in one of two ways. In the American model, we defend the individual. In the Indonesian model, we defend the group. And these present new conflicts and challenges that are not easy to solve. I'm happy to talk more about specific examples going forward. But I tread very carefully here because, as I said before, I truly am an American patriot, but I also truly believe that Indonesia is a remarkable country. And I don't wish to criticize, but it is a point of fact that this is a challenge that the Indonesian system faces. So, you now may be asking, which one of these models is better? The answer is I don't know. The two models are two different approaches to solving an inherent tension in democracies, multicultural democracies. So I do not know which one of these is the better way to go or which one is the one that I would recommend. But I do think that there are strengths and weaknesses of each. I've talked to you a little bit about what these strengths and weaknesses are. And I also think that each can create risks for individuals of a different type. The risks for individuals in the American model is what happens, how do we protect the rights of those who are relatively small, who are relatively weak, when we cannot protect them as a group. We have to protect them as individuals. In the Indonesian model, the challenge is how do we protect individuals who wish to not conform, who wish to criticize? These are tough questions. They don't have easy answers, but they are resolved in two very different ways, and we can learn from those differences. I also want to emphasize, and here I will talk only about the United States, that even though I have emphasized laws, constitutions, and regulations that exist, and even though I think that Sigit is right, the rule of law in the United States is a very important tool that that Americans and visitors have to protect their rights and status. In practice, the United States has not been perfect. We have been struggling to have true equal rights for Black Americans since independence, and it is not over yet. We are still there. This is a picture taken this summer, and recognizing the rights of Black Americans has proven, sadly, very hard for some Americans to even say the words Black Lives Matter is a political statement. And I do believe that the shameful events that took place earlier this month in Washington, D.C. are in some part an expression of the challenges and the struggles that Americans continue to face in completing the process of creating a true, diverse democracy. So I will not say that America's model is the best one, and I will not say that it is implemented perfectly in practice. But it is a project whose ideas, I believe, are feasible. And they do represent one way of dealing with the challenges of multi-ethnic democracy. So here's my final slide. Multiculturalism, religious and ethnic and racial diversity, is not easy. However, every democracy has to find a way to resolve it. Every democracy must find a way to deal with the challenges of multiculturalism and monoculturalism, just asserting that there is only one culture or one religion or one ethnicity or one nation is not an option. What we can create is a civic identity that adds allegiance and identification with the state to ethnic and religious identities, but it will never replace these other identities. Group rights may produce group stability, as I've said here, but they do so at the expense of individual rights and liberties. At the same time, individual rights may produce individual stability at the expense of group recognition. And dealing with these problems is the great struggle of contemporary American politics, and I suspect it is also the great struggle of contemporary Indonesian politics as well. And so thanks for inviting me here, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to share some of these thoughts, to think about the country that I come from and the country that I love, the country that I find the most interesting, and then the country that I find the second most interesting. So thanks very much for having me, and it's my pleasure to take some questions.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you also, Sigit, for the presentation. It was very wonderful to have two professors coming from two different countries presenting each other's perspectives. So I think we have received some questions from our audience here. So I think I will invite the first audience who's going to ask the question. Arindra from Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. Is Arindra here? Oh, hi, Arindra.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, very clearly. Yes. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, first of all. And then I would like to ask about what is the background of the cultural appropriation phenomena that is happening in the America, and then why it is become more prominent as the Black Lives Matter movement emerged from last year.
Okay, thank you for the question, Arindra. So I think this question can be for both speakers. So if I may repeat, the first question would be, what is the background of the cultural appropriation phenomenon that happened in America? And the second one would be why it becomes more prominent in the past year. Maybe Sigit or Tom would like to start first.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so probably just a little thought on that. So what I understood in terms that cultural appropriations and how we use kind of cultural items, maybe like icons that sometimes kind of contrasting with the intentions of the one who owns that particular identity thing. So my voice is echoing, or let me. Sorry. Okay, so how about now? Clear? Okay, so one of the thing is maybe if in a very short answer and maybe a little bit reductionist or simplistic answer is because we learn others mostly now through screen. What I mean is, okay, I learn about your veil, about maybe your body or other thing. It's more on the screen. So it means that we have very limitations in terms of really understand what does it mean to the persons who has their identity. And actually it's related to when Tom explained about how he actually feel not really clear in terms of what is the identity background and why this practice become prominent in among Americans because they not really they absorb hybrid through pop cultures and also the industries of the entertainment industries. People took one item from other and combine into a certain what they want to just to understand that to give a new meaning on that. While for the one who has that particular identity, sometimes feel kind of insulting or something. For example, for myself, it's very initially when I saw one of my friends using patchy for doing what's it is Christians using that for the speech in the church. So sometimes it kind of first is striking for me, but So there's two things I would say in terms of appropriations, that there is a level of those commodifications about the identity, but in the other hand, it's also the willingness actually people try to understand with their own limitations. So my friends try to use that patchy, or maybe his wife try to use the scarf. Or some things that probably for us is not appropriate, because they use it for maybe their religious things, but because they just want to respect their friends, their Muslim friend. So this thing that I do think that Arindra probably, yeah, we need to see in very what's it, a different level on how this happening. And I don't think it's also happen in Americans, among Americans, but we as more now urbans, that's kind of a little bit uprooted from our own identity as Indonesians, or maybe our local identities, that sometimes we try to find meanings and then we combine on this thing. Okay, so but I do want to address a bit about how actually the one that really amazingly presented by Tom, in terms that we both country have challenges, and some we can say that there's a history or maybe other factors that create a different path of dependence on how we build our own democracy and our own society. What I'm understanding is actually in how the trend is we have a certain type, certain ways, although we it's also open for learning. But the problem is the trend is on the wrong directions, meaning that for me as Indonesians, what I'm seeing that it's a good to have more very group approach on diversity. But the problem is it's very strengthened in very limited in which this group approach. While actually we need to expand a bit in of accommodating about individual liberty and also rule of law. While in the other hand, the Americans is strengthening on those individuals, while neglecting in terms of how the common purpose, their associations, their groups, things that is part of the American democracy that they have in their history. Robert Putnam clearly identified as the social capital of Americans on that. So what I'm saying is probably, I don't think this is answering Tom's questions earlier, but maybe we as Indonesians need to work in terms of the institutional approach, having more rule of law. It's particularly related to the FPE things issues, while at the same time maybe US can learn from Indonesia in terms of how the cultural approach, in terms that how Indonesia understand tolerance mean to have restraint, to respect others as a community. So probably we can find some convergence on that directions.
Thank you for the wonderful answer, Sir Sigit. So, Tom, you want to add anything?
Sure, I'll just add a couple of thoughts about on the question of cultural appropriation, because I think Arendra, this is a very interesting question, and I have a couple of thoughts. So I want to emphasize first off that that America is a country that is inherently mixing of different traditions and histories, and cultural appropriation is sometimes hard to understand, because, for example, what is my culture? I don't even know my own heritage properly. And so if you said, what is the culture that I own? What is my cuisine? What do I eat? What is my clothes? I can't tell you what that is. I think Americans, many like me, are very eager to simply borrow from things that are new and interesting to them. And I don't think that it's malicious. I think many, as Sigit said, a lot of it is simply curiosity and desire to learn. However, there is a particular dark side to this, which is not, I don't think, although you can tell me, I don't think that my wearing peak for presentations is cultural appropriation. But I do know that in many cases, cultural items or cultural practices are borrowed and then they are monetized. Then they are used for purposes of economic profit. And here, there's a long history of this happening in the United States. And I'm thinking of the way that white musicians, not just Americans, also British, used the music of Black Americans as the foundation for their own careers. And even though they didn't write the songs, they are the ones who became famous. They are the ones who became paid. I think that's so. The background is long, Arindra. It goes back a long time. The reason why it's become more prominent is because we are finally in America willing to start asking the question, where do these practices come from? And if you know that Led Zeppelin and Rolling Stones did not write these songs, you have a greater appreciation for what is the essence of American culture. These things that we understand as really modern are actually quite old. And our recognition of that fact, I think, explains why this has become more prominent recently.
Thank you, Tom. So it completes the whole answer. So both of the perspectives can connect to each other. Okay, we're kind of rushing, so I'm just going to move forward to the second question. Is Sylvia Safitri here? Okay, Sylvia, you have a very great question, so you can ask her.
Okay, so is my voice clear? Is my voice clear?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, everyone. So thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to ask questions to both speakers, to honorable speakers. My question will be, the state shapes religion and vice versa. So religion gave state authorities and state power its legitimacy, and the government was the protector of the faith. So however, how do you see the relationship between the government and Islamic Defenders Front Group or FPI? Because it would be inherent tension in democracy. That's the question.
Thank you for the question, Sylvia. This is a very juicy issue that we're talking about right now. I think Tom's getting ready. Okay, so please, Tom or Sigit, please.
Sure.
Sylvia,
thank you very much for the question. So let me preface by saying that I actually don't agree with the first part of your question, that state shapes religion. I'm sorry, the second part of your question. So the state shapes religion and religion shapes the state, I do believe is true. However, I don't agree that it is always the case that religion gives state authorities and state power its legitimacy, and that the government is the protector of the faith. I think that it can be the case, and in many countries it is. But I think it's important to remember that that is not always true. That is not generally the case. And this becomes very interesting when we think about the relationship between religious groups and the state, because it begs the question of, from what does the state derive its legitimacy? I'll very briefly, the most interesting case of this is the case of Malaysia, which is an Islamic state that has a constitution that says the sole authority of Malaysian law is the constitution, not religion. So the constitution on its own terms derives legitimacy from itself, and then it claims the right to represent religion rather than invoking Allah as the source of authority that goes through the constitution. So with this distinction in mind, that it's not necessarily the case that religion provides legitimacy for the state. I think that it's important then to talk about that the relationship between religious groups, or those who act in the name of and those who defend the government and the government itself. I do not think it's inherently a tension in democracy that a group acting in the name of religion may come into conflict with the government, because I do not know on whose authority FPE claims to be acting in the name of religion. It has that claim itself, but I don't know from what authority that derives. So I don't see this as an inherent tension in democracy. I view this as a very tricky challenge for, right? But I think it comes down to constitutional law and criminal law in the Indonesian case. This doesn't have broad implications for democracy in general. This is as our host Denisa said, this is juicy. It's a tricky question, but I actually don't think it's a hard question for democratic theory. It's a hard question for Indonesia.
All right. Okay. So thank you for the answer. Sigit, you want to add?
Okay, so this is my colleague, Mbak Sylvia. So thank you for joining us this at America and bring all the students in this event. So I do think that actually is more the issues that you brought up is not more on the multiculturalism in itself, but it's actually is more on the issue of rule of law, the thing that we are lack of all this. So meaning that because we have a tendency to treat as a group, as a religious group, and see FPI as a religious groups. So we kind of respond even like a state. This is on that basis. Although actually the issue is more on rule of law, and this is also the same on the side of the one who kind of pro with FPI and defend FPI because of why this group is being punished and not the other one. So again, in line actually with my previous arguments, meaning that we as Indonesians, we have this kind of models that Tom just mentions in terms of but I do think that we need to expand it in terms of the rule of law. So what I mean here is what I learned also from US. So you are not being punished because of the thought or the ideology of FPI or the way they are thinking about what they believe of Islam should do, but actually it should be treated as a criminal activity if they do a criminal activity. So if they do charitable work, so they should be appreciated on that. So the problem is we are not consistent in using our model, because the model is sometimes being kind of shaped by certain short political benefits or goals that so that's the thing that we both in many people are not very satisfied what government do, because they feel that how actually certain policy or certain ruling is just implemented on certain groups due of their way of the thinking and consider difference or maybe consider extreme. So I do think that we need to move on. So we not judge people based, and we try to re-educate people in terms of how they think. But actually, we need to really differentiate in terms of that the criminal act should be punished, criminal act consistently. So of course, this is a challenge. It's not as easy as I'm saying, but I do think that we need to see in that directions rather than seeing always that, oh, this is between Islam, FPI with the other groups or something like that. But this is, we need to it practically or concretely what they are doing, and they should get the reward or punishment, any group, any religious group, based on what they are doing.
All right, thank you. I would love to ask a very speed quick for both speakers. So Tom and Sigit, one quick answer. Do you agree or disagree with what the government did to FA at the moment?
Both agree and disagree.
Thank you. That's very diplomatic. So, Sigit, do you agree or disagree?
Okay, so actually, I said respond a little bit kind of really bit kind of very critical to what the government do, meaning that yeah, I do think that they have very strong reason. The what the FA did, there's a clear evidence that they are was it against the rules. But the problem is, yeah, that's you use that to judge not because of this particular act, but it's more on the try to frame the mindset of FPA or some different ways of understanding of Islam is putting one group that can be considered this is the unlegitimate understanding of. So we need to Indonesia have very strong. I think we have strong history in terms that we are archipelagic countries that we are being influenced with many cultures and as also the cultural standard of Indonesia actually tend to adapt with differences, seeing the differences, even like some a little bit kind of extreme ideas. So they tend to be able to cope with that. And to be honest, when a lot of people hear my friends or family say that, oh, this is very radical or extreme, oh, I see more than that in US. And okay, so actually things that what we see here is kind of very, it's nothing it's my personal understanding of what FPE did. Actually, they have a lot of different understanding. I have a lot of disagreement with what FPA said, but I do think that actually is still within the spectrum that as we as Indonesians can accept on that.
Okay. Thank you, Sigit, for the answer and the explanation. So I'm going to move forward to the next question. Do we have Resti?
Yeah. Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes. Yes, Resti, you can ask your question.
Good evening, Professor Tom and Sir Sigit. Thank you for very much for the opportunity. I would like to ask to both of the panelists, if a country has equal diversity in its citizens, and that also occurs in the structure of government, whether the government will have any strengths or weaknesses, such as there will be many different arguments depending on its religious or ethnic interests. Maybe that's all. Thank you very much.
Yes. Who would like to answer first? Go ahead, please.
Okay, so okay, let me answer a bit, Tom. So yeah, I think yeah, it's kind of be both a way, meaning that there is or said issues that it will be bring benefit to the country is in terms of economically, maybe in terms of the what's it the societal what's it relations, but also it's kind of challenging that we have. So. Seeing what the Indonesian and US actually kind of building the approach or model on these differences. So we can see that US is kind of the example of more able to absorb those differences for their economic benefit to the in many aspect of it because the essence of the model of this on the individual liberty and egalitarianism. And this is kind of the main source, the energy of actually a lot of US dominance economically and politically. But for Indonesia, it's very challenging because then we heard from the presentation before that actually we kind of very limited approach on the diversity. We embrace diversity, but within certain extents, with this communal group category or qualification. So I do think this is very challenging and can be maybe shortfall or shortcoming for Indonesia if yeah, we have too much diverse and so probably it's a little bit challenging with the current institutional infrastructure that we have. Probably culturally, probably Indonesians are more resilient, resistance to all this different, not resistant, sorry, resilient with a lot of influences, differences. We have ability to adopt, to assimilate, cultural relations among different culture. But the problem is more on the institutions that I do think that actually it's a little bit kind of lacking. Probably it will not become a benefit, but cannot become a problem in the future. So that's my response. Thank you for the question, Rusty.
Thank you, Sigit.
Yeah, I'd like to add a similar thought on this point. I think that it is important for governments to be representative of the populations that I don't think it's essential, but I think it's important. So if a country has, like the United States, has 75% white people and 25% non-white people, I think it would be very problematic to have 100% of the government be white. You need some diversity there. And the diversity is both representational, just so people can see that people like them are also members of the government, but it's also substantive in order to represent the types of interests that exist among different communities. But there's a really fine line here that I think I'm going to try to explain the difference quickly and succinctly, but it's tough. I think it's essential for diverse representation to be diverse in terms of substance and not focused on identity itself. And so when a Black American goes to Congress, he represents Americans, not just Black Americans. He works on behalf of the interests that Black and white Americans may have. And if this is the case, the diversity of representation need not create arguments based on ethnic differences. However, if we conceive of people's identity as being the only thing that they represent, then I do think that the problem that you have is exactly that you'll have just arguments based on identities that cannot be commensurate. And so the trick here is to ensure that you have representational diversity, but that those who are participating in government are not solely as representatives of their group, but as stewards who are responsible for the all groups, even though they have a particular identity as well. I hope that makes sense of that distinction.
Okay, thank you for the answers. I hope that answer the questions from Astia. We're going to the last question. Zahra, are you ready to ask your questions to the speakers? Zahra?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes, of course, yes.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Okay, I will ask the question, and the question is, the ideology of liberalism with the system of democracy and human rights, always called as universalism values. Since they both has a lot of good values in there, Are you guys thinking the same, that democracy and human rights has a good universalism values, or just because the imperialism is the winner of the Cold War, so it's called as good ideology? Thank you. And yeah, since I know that you guys can speak in Bahasa, I will be happy if you can answer my questions in.
How fast? Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay. Okay. So, menurut pendapat saya, bukan liberalisme yang menang dalam perang dingin. Yang menang hanya negara-negara yang beraliansi dengan Amerika Syarikat. Itu bukan pemenangan ideologi liberalisme melawan komunisme. Itu pemenangan negara melawan negara lain atau koalisi lain. Sebenarnya saya sendiri pikir, saya berpendapat bahwa ideologi liberalisme dan demokrasi memang nilai-nilai universal. Saya tidak bisa membuktikannya, tapi itu percayaan saya. Bukan karena perang dingin, karena itu kepercayaan saya. Kalau itu masuk akal. Oke.
Oh ya, bahasa Indonesianya luar biasa, Tom. Oke, so ya, jadi mungkin saya lebih fokus di kata universalisme. Jadi meskipun saya dengan Tom berbeda di banyak hal, gitu, jadi ada kepercayaan yang sama, atau bukan kepercayaan, mungkin nanti dikira sebagai agama, bukan, tapi lebih ke ada bahwa ada hal-hal yang kita sepakati bersama tentang tadi hak-hak yang perlu dilindungi, setiap orang itu punya hak, lalu istilahnya penghormatan terhadap tadi kebebasan beragama. So, jadi ada universal, ada nilai-nilai yang universal yang kita pegang bersama, dan saya yakin bahwa kita perlu ada nilai yang kita pegang bersama. Jadi bukan mengajarkan atau mempromosikan bahwa setiap orang bebas apa saja dengan relativismenya, bahwa kita butuh sebagai sebuah komunitas global, lokal atau nasional, itu kita butuh ada nilai-nilai yang kita sepakati bersama. So I do think, dan inilah ada hal yang universal. Tapi dalam filosofi etika juga, bahwa kita mengenal ada yang universal, tebal dan tipis, mungkin bahasanya. Dan universal yang tipis itu artinya adalah ada nilai-nilai dasar yang kita sepakati bersama, seperti yang kita akui dengan UN Declaration of Human Rights, for example. Tapi seperti tadi, contoh bagaimana Indonesia mengimplementasikan demokrasinya, membangun multikulturalismenya, pasti akan berbeda dengan Amerika, karena tadi memang kita ada sejarah, kita ada pengalaman, ada kondisi geografis, kondisi masyarakat yang berbeda, dan itulah yang harusnya kita pegang. Artinya kita universal untuk hal-hal yang sangat prinsipal, tapi kita juga harus tolerance untuk berbagai macam variasi. Istilahnya ya, oke, kalau saya Muslim misalnya, saya sepakat bahwa istri saya yakin wajib memakai jilbab, ya terserah warnanya seperti apa, gayanya seperti apa, untuk menutup aurat seperti apa. Tapi kita punya kesepakatan bahwa tentang, for example, menutup aurat. It's just kind of sebagai ilustrasi saja. Itu.
Oke, terima kasih banyak jawabannya. Saya jadi lanjut pakai bahasa Indonesia ya. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you for the answers, Tom, Sigit. Terima kasih juga kepada teman-teman yang sudah bertanya. Masih ada beberapa pertanyaan lagi, tapi mohon maaf, we're running out of time. I think because this is our first Knowledge at America, so I think this is a very good last point. So I think, thank you so much. I would like to thank everybody. Thank you for the speakers. Thank you for the audience for coming, for participating in this session. I hope that this can be a very insightful session. And we are very much looking forward to have you in another Knowledge at America session. So I'm going to give this back to Maya. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for all of our speakers and also Kak Denisa for moderating our events today. That was a very mind-opening session. We hope to see you again next time. But the rest of you, please don't go anywhere because I have the name of the winner for our social media quiz today. Earlier in this event, I asked you guys, is it true or false that the slogan of the Republic of Indonesia, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, has the same philosophy as the United States of America's slogans, A Pluribus Unum? And the right answer is true. Both Bhinneka Tunggal Ika and A Pluribus Unum have the same intended meaning, to be united in diversity. And our winner for today is at the Yudi Prasetyo from Instagram. Congratulations, Yudi. Now, you may be wondering, how can I develop an awesome idea for a place like this? Easy. You can go to our website at www.atamerica.or.id, click create an event, and collaborate with us. All proposals coming to us will be reviewed and your event might be featured here soon. And while you're on our website, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletters for weekly event updates sent straight to your inbox. Alright everybody, I think that wraps up this episode. It has been really fun, but unfortunately we have to say goodbye for now. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at ATAmerica for event updates, fun content, and so much more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Thank you so much everybody for tuning in. Goodbye everybody.